Okay, if the next panelists would like to come up, I'll introduce you as you walk onto the stage. Some of you in the room will realize there was an election last week. I'll be honest, I haven't got around to watching it yet, so I'm looking forward to finding out the results from our fantastic panelists. We've got Christy Greco-Johnson from NBAA. Christy is a real expert on US aviation and politics. Before joining NBAA as Senior Vice President of Government Affairs, she spent 25 years advising, sorry, is that unfair? She spent a very decent amount of time working on the Hill, including Chief of Staff for the Chair of the US House Committee on Transportation Infrastructure. Jens needs no introduction. He's been at Gamma for more than 20 years now. I'm allowed to say that, aren't I?
I'll take it. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
I think everyone in the room knows how important NBAA and Gamma are to the industry. So, were you surprised by the result?
Tough first question. I think, we saw the challenges of polling again this cycle. I think both sides felt pretty confident going into this election that they had done, what was necessary to win. I think at the end of the day, we saw that, the Democrats fell short, especially at the presidential level. But there were a lot of surprises in there that we can talk about here. It's funny, I talked to my friends. I spent a lot of years campaigning at the presidential level, at the congressional level, and, people that have been doing this for a long time had a lot more confidence than what the outcome was. So there'll be a lot of soul searching on the Democratic side, but I think, Republicans will want to examine the results closely as well as they, set out their agenda and look to maintain their majorities and maintain the White House in future years.
Do you miss campaigning? Because you did it for so long. Is it hard now you're neutral? Or?
I've confessed I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie, and I think there's a lot of excitement in campaigns. There's a lot at stake, and there's something about being a part of something that's greater than yourself. But still involved in politics in a way, and it's exciting to still be a part of it from the NBAA perch. But yeah, this is a bit of an exciting season for me, or my Super Bowl, if you will.
Were you surprised, Jens?
I gotta say no. I spent a lot of time traveling throughout the country. I live in D.C., so clearly surrounded by a lot of people who were very late that night, very eager. But traveling around in 2016, starting traveling the last couple of years across America, it was not only the same feeling as in 2016. People were excited about it in a new way, much more open way. But people that were open about it that I didn't really expect. So the simple test, right? The number of Fox News channels that you see in the different areas, the conversation, right? So I had many good friends on the Democratic side who were excited about Tuesday, some of the polling, some of the opportunity, but add in the complexities, many of the things that I'm sure Christy's looking. This was something where it just became clearer and clearer the last couple of years that this was very much heading in the same direction as 2016.
And Chris, is now just a quiet period until the inauguration?
Hardly. I think heading into a transition, whether it's administrations or it's Congress, there's a chain reaction, a massive churn that happens in Washington. It started well before the election and will carry through March in large part, but will go on through June. The outgoing members will be departing Washington. There'll be a shift of staff into different offices. The White House will pull more staff to the White House. You can see already Elise Stefanik has been named UN ambassador. She'll likely bring some of her congressional staff with her to that post. And, there'll be a scramble for a new leader in the Republican House leadership. So there'll be a lot of that movement happening. And of course, setting out the agenda. What will the Republicans who are likely to capture the trifecta with majority in the White House, or having the White House, majority in the House, and a majority in the Senate, setting out the agenda, knowing what those priorities are with narrow majorities in the House and the Senate is going to be really important. And that work really starts now. I was on the Hill last week, and there were movers in place that were moving offices. The majority really does have its benefits, not only in having the requisite number of votes to win on the House floor and the Senate floor, but real estate. Your offices are closer to the House and the Senate floor. And so when you lose the majority, you have to move out of those offices and into the less desirable offices. So a lot of that work is happening now, and there's a lot of energy. And on our side as well, we're looking to who will be heading new agencies, new departments, the committees on the Hill, and how we can leverage our champions in Congress and build champions in the new administration.
Jens, how does it work for you? Because you spend, both MBAA and Gamma spend a lot of time getting to know, the representatives of the Hill and lobbying. And, do you know most of the new ones coming in? And also, I know you're an expert on the FAA. I know you were also there. But do you expect big change at the FAA now?
So I'll stick with the FAA, which is more my lane than Christie's, who's on the political side. But, on the political side, like Christie said, huge turnover. We got to reintroduce ourselves up on Capitol Hill. It's a continuous thing every 2 years. This is a big election, and there's a shift clearly. So reintroducing the industry to some new stakeholders is going to be a priority for getting into the new year. The transition teams are already out there. Clearly, some of them already announced here earlier today, but on the DOT side, that's in the works, that's been in the works. And I mean, Wednesday morning, they were already doing outreach to the different stakeholder associations. So this will happen quickly and with a lot of energy, a great deal of energy. So that's clear. On the FAA side, the FAA, looking back even 5-6 years, has gone through a lot of leadership changes. One of our frustrations has been a lack of stable leadership. It's hard to get things done within a bureaucracy when the people at top and the people up in key leadership positions, they keep turning over. And we've seen that mostly continuously since about 2017, 2018. And that's been a challenge to the agency on top of many other challenges. So where we're at right now, head of safety has already announced his retirement. So that's a key position. We'll see how that one gets filled. Head of aircraft certification, and we on the manufacturer side, we have an acting person there, a really good, solid person, but again, in an acting role. You have the top echelon, which are more on the political side. They'll obviously be making decisions about where they go next few years. The FAA administrator is a 5-year position, but I think since that legislation was passed about 2 decades ago, there hasn't been many 5-year position FAA administrators because of other externalities, right? We saw Steve Dixon who was appointed by Trump, even though he was a solid, very good aviation person, when the new team came in, his work became more complex, right? So there's a trust factor there based on that. So that carryover is going to be something to keep an eye on there. So what else is live issues? Let's not forget that 5 months ago, an FAA reauthorization bill provided clear bipartisan direction to the FAA. Plenty of work still to be done there. It was strongly bipartisan, so hopefully many of the good things that are in there, in spite of the election and the turmoil that creates, they stay on forward momentum.
And I think that transition is very difficult, as Jens highlighted, with the lack of permanent leadership in those lines of business. And at the top, as administrator, there's a slowing of progress as the agency, kind of waits for the new permanent leadership to be in place. Because the expectation is they might tweak or change the priorities. And so the workforce has to pivot with them. And those times of transition require a lot of coordination among associations and a lot of stepped up advocacy, communication with the agencies about our priorities and reminding the new people that step into place, even though we have an existing relationship with a lot of them that end up taking those jobs, ensuring they know what our priorities are and helping drive those
Yeah, one X factor. This came up just the other day. We hosted our annual meeting, and our team was briefing it. You know, the biggest user of what's called the Congressional Review Act, which gives Congress discretion to go back and look at the regulatory side, the executive side of the prior administration, and so
For the
forth.
last 60 days.
Yep, for the last 60 days. The biggest user of that in the history of, since it was passed, was the Trump administration when they came on board. The date, I think, I may be getting this off, 16 of the 20 times that it's actually played out was under the last administration. So I'm sure there's a list. I don't know what that list looks like, but it's something worth keeping an eye on for what's happened. And again, in the aviation side, our rules don't tend to be that controversial. However, on the broader policy place, that's clearly something that's in the queue.
And Jens raises a really important tool that the, incoming Congress and the incoming administration have with the Congressional Review Act. I think one of the challenges here in this transition is understanding what the priorities are, because there's a lot of competing interest. There's been a lot of conversation about the things that President Trump wants to do when he takes office, but what's first, what's second? And again, marshaling his partners in Congress with all of those competing interests and narrow majorities is going to be a challenge. Sequencing is going to be really important.
I mean, there was a session at MBAA base in Vegas a few weeks ago with Sam Graves and Rick Larson, who did the reauthorization. And it was interesting how non-partisan aviation felt from them. It was a great session with them being very, Democrat, Republican, working together. And do you feel aviation's less contentious?
I think transportation writ large has historically been nonpartisan, less partisan. There's a lot of common ground there. Elected members of Congress and, administrations have something tangible to show for the investments. You can cut a ribbon in front of a bridge or, a new runway, turn some dirt and celebrate those accomplishments. It also helps to have congressionally directed spending to garner the necessary support for legislation, otherwise known as earmarks, which actually get a bad name. Oftentimes those federal dollars stop at the state DOTs and get directed to the larger cities, so that congressionally directed spending can ensure that, the representatives, representing those smaller and mid-sized communities are driving federal dollars to the needs in those communities. So I think you've seen that historically, but as the, as partisanship increased and that environment became more combative, if you will, you saw that seeping into transportation. I think Sam Graves and Rick Larson really, were a model of bipartisanship with the FAA reauthorization. And the benefits you reap are, in the FAA Reauthorization Act. It's probably the broadest, most comprehensive reauthorization we've seen in many years. And it helped drive momentum to get the bill, passed by large bipartisan majorities in the House and the Senate. But you've also seen, who will be the new chairman in the Senate, Ted Cruz from Texas, and Maria Cantwell from Washington State. They've had a history of working together, and they've worked not only in FAA Reauth, but a number of other issues in a bipartisan way. So there's room for that. The Transportation Committee and Senate Commerce Committee will be taking up reauthorization of surface transportation next year, but there will be oversight of FAA reauthorization that we'll be working on to ensure that those priorities in that bill get implemented efficiently and on time.
I mean, the bill passed 387-27 in the House, 88-4 in the Senate, so that's about as good as it gets in D.C. these days. It's one of the few bills that actually did pass in the current Congress, which says something about the collaboration and state of play in Washington, D.C., so that's a data point. It's a 4.5-year bill, so doing math from when it was passed, it takes us to October 1 of 2028, if my math is correct. Which then, if you're doing math from the election, you know that there's an opportunity in a few years for the administration. And recently, there hasn't been a lot of effort from either administration or the FAA teams in past reauthorization to really go in and define it. The last one was somewhat soft, even in the incoming administration's attempt here. The current one, very hands-off in the approach, right? But there's clearly an opportunity down the line there. But there's so many good things, especially for the industry. There's a GA bill, a number of MBA priorities are in there, gamma priorities on aircraft certification, new entrants, rulemaking reform, a number of things like that. So it'll keep us busy, like Christy said, some oversight hearings and other things like that. But it is historically a field where bipartisan ship is better than in other areas.
And I think on priorities and FAA reauthorization, obviously advanced air mobility and, helping to ensure the safe integration of this new technology. We'll see, the first entrants here maybe in the next year. But also streamlining processes at the FAA, whether it's, the Air Medical Office or aircraft certification, moving those from analog to digital, and of course, flight tracking, flight safety, data security. There's provision in there to improve the programs at the FAA, and we've already seen progress in that space.
Is there anything that you're concerned about? Like, are we going to see ATC privatization come back, or?
Who was the chairman on the Senate side, you said?
Ted Cruz.
And in the last Congress, what did Ted Cruz think about that?
He was interested in it.
So among risks coming up here, I think industry is the part of the aviation industry has gone through enough fights on the topic of privatization that even some of the proponents in past fights and engagements, I think, have realized that it tends to not be a productive exercise. There are conversations that need to be had about FAA funding, investment in the system, which there were some attempts here recently. They're interesting to look at, how the system is funded, and many related things like that. But that's where I think industry, and that's a broader industry beyond business and general aviation, at least in the last few cycles, have been interested in taking it, because there's been fight on fight on fight going back to the 1980s, and they have not been productive. Is there still interest? Is there a key person for whom there is interest? Was there a push in the last administration? Yes.
Yeah, I think a few of the players, namely the Trump administration and Senator Ted Cruz, who have some interest in this idea, but there's no vehicle, there's no FAA reauthorization to move such a big idea. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't be vigilant about it. It also doesn't mean there wouldn't be an asymmetric approach to ideas that were part of that concept, like, raising fees, changing fees for business aviation, general aviation. We saw in the Biden administration budget this year a proposal for a 5-fold fuel tax increase. That's something that could move in a tax bill, which again, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provisions under the previous Trump administration are expiring. So there'll be a major tax bill next year that we need to be thoughtful about. What are the pay-fors being introduced in this bill, and where are some aligned coalitions that might get behind something like that? Your populist Republicans and your progressive Democrats. So we need to continue to communicate to this new administration and the new members of Congress and our champions on the Hill the value of business aviation. We have an initiative called Climbing Fast, in which we talk about all of those societal benefits, the job creation, the economic stimulus, the humanitarian mission, and all of those important aspects of business aviation that really resonate with bipartisan majorities in Congress. So when these ideas come up about user fees and fuel tax, we can push back on those with the message that those types of ideas are going to have a negative impact on the jobs and economic stimulus that business aviation provides.
I mean, the opportunity we have is that if you look at the way the FAA is funded primarily, which is through the trust fund, if you look at the projections, is actually in really good shape. The dialogue that has been in the early stages over the past couple of years, including in the current administration, but in prior years as well, is to really look at tapping into that money. You know, why raise taxes or why restructure that? Both of them are sensitive areas. When tapping into the existing trust fund structure, providing the FA certain budget authorities, multi-year spending for infrastructure, everybody likes infrastructure, those are real opportunities. Now, will there be a TJCA 2.0 next year? Well, it looks more and more likely. Can it be done through a vehicle like reconciliation? Very, very likely, based on wherever the House is at, last couple of votes. When does it play out? Probably in the, latter part of next year, optimistically. Christy may disagree, but plenty of work is going to go into that, and it's a vehicle for many priorities of the team that's coming into out of the election.
Yeah, I think Jens brings up the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act 2.0. He also suggested that it might be moved through Congress under a tool called the Reconciliation Act, and it allows it's a procedural tool that allows legislation to move in the Senate by a simple majority. We're all familiar with the filibuster and the 60-vote threshold. If both houses can pass a budget reconciliation act on certain tax and spending proposals, they could move a major tax package with a lot of wins for the Republican majority in there. I think we would also see restoration of 100% bonus depreciation.
Which is a great answer, because we've got 5 questions, 4 of which are about
There you
bonus
go.
depreciation.
Well, there you go, check. Corporate tax rate change potentially, and a number of other issues. I would also like to raise another issue that I'll be watching closely is sustainable aviation fuel and the SAF tax credits. President Trump has mentioned his interest in repealing the Inflation Reduction Act, in which the blender's tax credit was included. But there was actually a moment in Congress and the House earlier this year when House Republicans tried to repeal the IRA full stop, and a number of farm state Republicans raised objection and withheld their vote because they saw the benefit of sustainable aviation fuel to their communities. There's a lot in sustainable aviation fuel production for blue-collar workers and the agriculture community producing feedstocks in the energy production industry. And I think there's a strong, coalition there that can help advance SAF even in this climate, even with a repeal of the IRA. That could be protected or perhaps repealed and replaced with another SAF-related tax provision. But we've worked hard to communicate the benefits to rural communities that sustainable aviation fuel production could provide, and that could help, move this provision forward. So that's something that I think we are going to need to work closely on and work very hard on. I think one major win and one area where we'll do that is the newly created Sustainable Aviation Caucuses in the House and the Senate. So these are like-minded members of Congress, bipartisan groups that have a shared interest in research and development of sustainable technologies, more efficient aircraft, more efficient engines, and also increasing production of sustainable aviation fuel. So there's some good opportunity there, I think.
There is a fantastic Trump quote where he said, negotiating with biofuel producers was worse than dealing with the Taliban.
Yes, yes. But there's a lot of issues in Congress that can be very, very touchy like that, and energy production can be very difficult. But, the incoming administration, even on the campaign trail, Donald Trump talked a lot about domestic energy production, how important that was to national security and the strength of, American independence. So I think, if we are thoughtful and strategic, we can ensure sustainable aviation fuel fits in that frame.
Jens, we've got a great question from Chris Tusker. How quickly will President Trump revert bonus depreciation back to 100%? And will he include 2023 and 2024?
Unless I'm missing my basic civics, it starts with Congress, last time I checked, for tax bills. So that bill that Christie discussed, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, I always feel like that's in the wrong order there a little bit, but clearly it's back up again here again. And for a taxing vehicle, that's the opportunity. That takes us into, again, latter half of next year again. DC wonk politics, but this reconciliation vehicle, the way it's been explained to me, I mean, it's a complex, cumbersome process. So, you know, there's a lot of talk about the first 100 days. Well, this is Congress starting, working themselves through a process. So to me, that is the opportunity to have a conversation about something like bonus depreciation, making a case for it in the midst of record backlogs in the industry and many other things, right? So there's a dialogue to be had, but to me, this is not a short fuse issue.
Yeah, and I think Jens touched on the important word, which is process. Unfortunately, that's what it really comes down to. Considering all that needs to be done, electing leadership, which happens this week in Congress, assigning new committees. Speaker Mike Johnson has to sit for election, on the House floor. The committees have to set their agenda, and they have to come together to determine what all goes into the Budget Reconciliation Act. That's a fight there. Again, with narrow majorities, you're really having to do some early negotiations with your own members of Congress and your own party to set the tone. And I think there's a lot of, with the outcome last week, there's a lot of expectation among Republicans in Congress and the administration. They want to get a lot done. And so the White House, the president, and the congressional leadership have a lot of work to do to manage expectations. Everyone's going to put their hopes and dreams in that Budget Reconciliation Act, and I think they've got to manage that carefully to pass the Budget Reconciliation Act, and then following that, they have to take up a tax bill, which is going to be very large. And what happens in Congress is when you respond to one group of members' requests, needs for their community, sometimes that upsets another group of members. So you're constantly, calibrating those issues and trying to find the right balance in the bill. That takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of time. I think they'll be ambitious and try to get budget reconciliation done by the spring and a tax bill by the end of the year. Uncertain whether it will be, will touch 23 and 24, but there's a lot of support for that provision, so I think there's a lot of hope that it will turn out well.
Do we have any questions or comments from anyone in the room would like to ask? It's so dark out there that I've got no idea. You could all have your hand up, frankly, and okay, I can't see anyone waving. If you could raise your phone or a lighter, that would be helpful. Okay, we've got more audience questions. We've got a tax session coming up, but Mike Christie is asking, how quickly will the IRS, by the way, we realize that a lot of these questions are impossible for you guys to answer, but we appreciate you trying. How quickly will the IRS audit program targeting aircraft owners be wound down? And what impact is that going to have on those in the early stages of an audit?
Simply, we're not sure, but that's one of our top questions. We'll be working with Congress, and they're hoping they can leverage their oversight capabilities to get answers to those questions. Those audits are funded through the Inflation Reduction Act, which provided more money for the IRS to hire the right auditors who had the necessary background and experience to audit these complex structures. So if they will change the program, how they will change the program, will they move the money to some other program? Will they institute, will they put some provision in the tax bill? Will they leverage the appropriations bills to ensure no funding can be used to continue the audits. These are all ideas that we plan to explore and discuss with an incoming administration, and the, incoming leadership in Congress. It's important to note that this lame duck session, the content of what happens in Washington in the next 2 months before the next Congress has been unknown. It's usually driven by who wins the election. And seeing that Republicans will control the House, the White House, and the Senate, appropriations will likely be kicked to next year. They'll do a continuing resolution so the new Congress and president have a chance to put their imprint on the appropriations bill. So that's that must-pass bill, the omnibus or package of bills, is a good place to insert certain priorities. You're not supposed to, as they say, authorize on appropriations bills or set policy on spending bills, but we'll seek out every opportunity that we can find.
Is either party more generous with funding the FAA?
The FAA has had consistent funding since they started. The challenges with the FAA's funding, and we were starting to make a little bit of a headway this last time, is really the agencies making the case for the funding that they need. There's a top-line number passed down. They try to meet it. Oddly enough, FAA, unlike many other agencies, does not go in and make the case for more money. TSA just last year went in and, one of the challenges that they had is turnover in the officers that we all meet in Officers in Blue here. They got a 35% increase, and that was the administrator going in making a case for we need the money and the funding. FAA it almost seems a little bit scared, and that has been true for a decade in pushing for more. So some of the efforts here, there's something called the FRRM, the discussion about multi-year funding is important. What has worried me is that the team working it, they seem to be struggling, and this goes back many, many years, and making this, you got to build a story about why you need the money, right? So the current push in the current administration, this can't come from the agency up, is we're going to try to do $8 billion over 5 years. Interesting project. Infrastructure, everybody loves infrastructure. What's it going to go for? Towers and radars. All right, that gets rolled out about a year ago. And we're in the meeting and we're talking to the team and they're like, it's what we could explain. So if you have a team that just, I don't know if they've gotten beaten up enough or whatever it is, if you cannot get beyond explaining towers and radars, there are many complex issues that need to be, brought up to the department, OMB, Congress needs to understand it, and they really knock on there. So FAA funding, again, trust funding, great shape, aviation is booming, more money's rolling into it, we need to figure out how to tap into it. That's been a multi-year discussion. I think we'll give that another go in the new year. It's always a fun project. Sure, you can always look at the rate of the taxation. They haven't been moved since the 1990s, really, with the exception of a tweak to our fractional operator friends here a few years ago. But how to deploy that money and telling the story about the FAA. There's still some scars from the Next Gen program that was widely misunderstood over the past 20 years. But at times they are successful. The focus on aircraft certification has helped us get more aircraft engineers into the FAA. 39 more in the most recent budget. That's not a large number, but that's a team that's been mostly flat. Here's a team that's been flat for decades as aviation is growing, becoming more complex. Commercial airlines, business aviation, AM, UAS, and they've been flat funded, right? So case can be made, but the FAA has many, many times struggled just being there to be the key champion, even when the industry has stepped in there. So that's a challenge ahead.
Piggybacking on what Jens talked about, which has been a really strong industry-wide partnership, not just general aviation, but aviation writ large. There's a strong industry labor coalition to increase funding for the FAA. But it is a challenge inside the administration to tell that story. I've worked at the FAA for a few years and got a front row seat to that. There's only about 7 or 8 political appointees at the FAA. It's a 45 to 47,000 person agency. It's a massive operating agency, as you all know. It's more akin to the DoD than it is to NASA. Most of the agencies are safety agencies and don't have that massive operations mandate. So, and it's obviously, there are a lot of technical issues. So oftentimes, when it comes to advocating for funding or, communicating within the administration, there's a misunderstanding about the agency and all of the different things that it does. And again, the number of people that the industry moves every day, the massive safety mandate, there's a lot at stake there. And I think there's a hesitancy to make any changes, but I think there's great need to continue to invest in the national airspace system. And, kind of picking the little pieces doesn't quite tell the big picture of what's needed. It was a very big deal that the political leaders in this administration went to the White House to advocate for that increased funding. I think we will continue to urge the new incoming political leadership to do so with the White House. The president has acknowledged the need for improvement in the NAS, so perhaps there's an opportunity to, and a willingness and responsiveness to work on that in the White House, but it's a major and challenging task at hand, and we have to keep at it year after year to try to make progress.
Yeah, this is not one of those should we or shouldn't we. This proposal is $8 billion over 5 years. That's a down payment. The rough order of magnitude that the FAA has floated is in the $50 to $60 billion over 20 years. And that's just to keep the lights on, things that are sitting out there rusting away, old devices, old equipment, computers that are no longer supported by the supplier, right? All those kind of things. So this is an investment that must be made by the United States. There'll be a lot of work in Washington, D.C. to get through the process of getting there, but this is important.
New fax machines. So going back to certification, 39 people is not going to speed up aircraft certification significantly, is it? Particularly when you've got 30 different eVTOL manufacturers.
We'll take it, though. It's an important thing, right? Again, the FAA aircraft certification workforce, this is a dialogue that's gone back to 2005. Never enough people. There's a top-line number that will move upward, but never at the speed of industry. So what has our story been for many, many decades? FAA has, since it was founded, many, many years ago, had authority for delegation. We shifted that over to Organizational Designation Authority, ODA. This is a more systematic, detailed, specific way of doing it, an organization that the FAA oversees with smarter use of resources, right? The unfortunate part is somehow, and for strange reason, it got completely pulled into the post-Boeing MAX evaluation. You see it discussed. So we're just now, Congress took a look at it through the AXA legislation in 2020. There's still those who think ODA is a bad thing. It's actually a strengthened form of oversight of the manufacturer. As a manufacturer, it's just not something that's handed over to you. There's a few manufacturers in the room, when they got their ODA authority, they hired 500-600 people. That's a number of people that the FAA could never bring on board there. So every now and then there's a milestone aviation accident. We learn from it, we strengthen the system, and that's what happened with ODA. So we need more bodies at the FAA, absolutely. We need to leverage delegation, organizational delegation more. We also need to train the FAA staff. Like in many parts of the industry, past 5 years, people made life choices. They retired, they looked at other things. Look at US Census 2020, it's one of the scariest reads out there. We're looking at a personnel and resource gap that's taking us to the 2030s. Microcosm of the FAA's aircraft certification organization, 40% of their employees had less than 3 years experience a few years ago. So here we are throwing a brand new high-end air transport aircraft, a business jet with the latest systems, eVTOLs, helicopters are doing fine, all segments of aviation are happening, increased scrutiny from Congress and the public, And you're looking at a kid who, the FAA used to hire engineers with 10 years of industry experience. No, these kids are straight out of college. And we're asking them to do this. There's an education need for the FAA. We're partnering with them. We have companies in the industries who have now sat down with the FAA, provided these brand new engineers the tools, the resources, and the education to get in there. So this is not a flip the switch and it's going to happen tomorrow. Things are starting to move in the right direction. It will take time. Going back to an earlier discussion, we need stability of leadership at the top at the FAA because they're the ones steering the ship. So we're heading in the right direction. We're seeing improvements, but not fully there. The other component on certification is validating our products. If you're a US state of design OEM, the Boeing MAX accidents resulted in a loss of trust in the US system. We're still rebuilding that. There's some great conversations with other foreign authorities happening just in the last few weeks saying, okay, we're gonna get back to the table, we're gonna rebuild that trust, we're gonna come up with our working arrangements, our existing bilaterals, but that also takes time. So getting better, but again, government is never gonna move at the speed of industry, and industry right now is at a high rate of activity.
I can't remember if it was Pete Bunce or Chris Rochely last year talking about how many positions were vacant in the FAA. Has there been any movement on that?
Yeah, I mean, we're topped off right now, but we're heading into retirement at the head of aviation safety. And, aircraft certification is empty right now. Hoping to see the FAA fill that position by the end of the year. But again, the head of that line of business it will be open at that time. And, I think I'll just reiterate the impact of Boeing on this area is kind of bleeding over and I think making things slower than we want them to be.
Yeah. And I mean, the FAA can compete in certain ways for workforce, but when industry is paying, in some cases, engineers getting paid, twice as much to go and work for an industry OEM that the FAA could ever match. They try to compete with lifestyle, many other things, their work location, but in the end, retaining people, hiring people, going to work for an agency that was somewhat tarnished, there's all these intangibles that played into really bringing people on board there. And that's why they, going from 10 years down to having a college degree engineer going into the agency, that was a reaction saying we are not getting people calling us for jobs, right? So this is multi-year challenge.
Okay, we've got more questions coming in. We've got 1 minute left. So should we do less yes/no answers?
Sure.
Do you think deregulation in a new administration would help eVTOL? You don't see the FAA.
No, you often need rules to regulate, to enable an industry. This is an industry that needs enabling regulations. I'm actually scared about the 2-for-1 rule from the last one, but that's a longer answer.
I haven't heard that re-energized, so I think we're okay there, but concur.
Right. Here's a question for Michael Amalfitano to answer tomorrow. If bonus depreciation stimulates sales, will the OEMs need to invest in production rates? I know he really wants to talk about production rates tomorrow, so we'll save that for tomorrow. A pleasure. Have MBAA and Gamma made contingency plans to respond if privatization is floated as a solution of the efficiency czar, Elon Musk?
We'll be ready.
We fought the fight before jointly, and we'll do it again.
That's a great answer by both of you. Should we talk about wider sustainability agenda rather than SAF or eVTOLs? I think actually we might need whoever asked that question to elaborate more. Should we talk about wider sustainability agenda rather than just SAF and eVTOLs?
We do. Yeah, I mean, our sustainability message covers the gamut, and it's really, grounded in the legacy that this industry has in sustainability and reducing emissions by 40% over the last 40 years. It's the Climbing Fast initiative, and it really is resonating on the Hill. I didn't realize that, and I had no idea. So it's opened doors and allowed us to build champions on the Hill in this area. From those interested in the jobs and manufacturing created by more efficient engines and more efficient aircraft to sustainable aviation fuel.
And I know you're going to answer yes, so I'm not giving you.
No, I got to give you this one actually. In addition to the SAF, we cannot forget about the investment in new technology on aircraft. Better engines. Interesting, going back to the election, one of the few environmental regulations signed out by the incoming president administration last round was actually a CO2 standard for aircraft. And we pushed that through. It was signed on because we made the case that in order to deliver U.S. aircraft internationally, we need to comply with worldwide standards. A weird one, a one-off, it gives me an idea of how to work over the next 4 years on some of these. But yes, it's SAF, it's investment in new technologies, and it's many other components.
Okay, I'm glad you answered that. Nice, easy question, Jens, for you to end on. This is from John. Is our industry concerned about the effects of, and I think this is one you can answer in 20 seconds. Is our industry concerned about the effects of the proposed tariffs discussed during the election campaign?
Yes.
Christy?
We'll be interested to see how that plays out, but yeah, I think there's some concerns.
Two great political answers to the last question. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Thank you.